Nicholas? Okay,
Yeah.
I want to make you bigger. No, I got to make everybody bigger. So let's get this going and let's get Nick up here. Hey, we finally did it. Welcome. Now we got to get people to join us, which we have one. Everyone, forgive me for this. I really don't exactly know what went wrong. When you use Skype with this Ecamm Live, there's a little setting you're supposed to have. And I had the setting on, so I don't know what happened. But I am going to say good evening to Nicholas Humphrey. Nick, I'm going to add your name by you. And Antonio, I'm going to add your name by you. And I'm going to add my name by me. And I am Sandy Shallis. And welcome to State of the Planet. Now that we finally got this, I finally have it settled and figured out. Nick, I would like you to start tonight because I think it's really important. You have been writing a lot, and you have a lot of information that you've been handling, writing on your Patreon page and all. And I'd like to see you guys maybe start the conversation. And Nick, welcome everybody for 2020 to our first State of the Planet. We're here.
Oh, nice to be here. So 2019 was a hell of a year. Where to start? Unprecedented fires in the Amazon, the Arctic, Australia. Now Australia's having more fires. Unprecedented droughts in many of those same places. Australia, especially. 2019 was the second warmest year on record, only behind 2017. So it's been the hottest decade on record. So we're definitely seeing climate change take off in ways that are bringing us to a truly alien world, a world that we are or our ancestors have never known. I saw a study that was recently discussed or posted on published in the Nature Climate Change, discussing the fact that we're now beginning to see the footprint or the fingerprint of global warming on daily weather patterns. Basically, the daily weather patterns have shifted to such a degree that now when you take into account normal global variability, you can actually identify climate change as having had an impact in shifting the weather conditions of the planet to more extreme conditions. And this is something you can only see at the global level, because when you look at local weather, there's still a lot of huge variability just based on what's going on locally in terms of the land, the topography, everything else.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at it on a global scale, then you see that the weather has actually changed, and temperature, humidity, things of that nature have shifted because of global warming. So, and I mean, unfortunately, that has real effects on wildlife, on ocean life. The oceans are the hottest they've ever been in the records, and obviously the extreme heat, drought, and fires in
Mm-hmm.
places such as Australia. So I mean, we're really reaching the point where we're starting to see all of the effects of climate change in our faces. You can't hide from it. You can't deny it. Well, you can deny it, but you seem stupid if you try to deny it, because I like to say that that climate change has gotten to the point where it's as real as the sun rising and setting every day. You can deny that the sun rises and sets every day, but it's happening right in your face every single day.
Every single day.
And so climate change is literally in our weather now, in our faces every single day.
I want to, if I can, I always thought that narrative that it's kind of coming out of the scientific literature, this very compartmentalized distinction between weather and climate. I think statistically you have to make a distinction, right? Obviously, you can break down these phenomena, whether it's something that's occurring on a minute-to-minute, daily basis, and then the averages of the weather is when we can start talking about climate. And averages that are useful are going to be averages that are done over certain increments of time. So we don't talk about climate until we start talking at least on a decadal scale. And even decadal is very small when we talk about, the long-term attributions of any particular type of climate episode. But I think what's interesting here is that I remember actually, people at Appalachian State University, PhDs in biology, this, that, and the other, making fun of me because I would point to extreme events. That's how, we articulate what's happening in climate change. Extreme weather phenomena as evidence of climate change. And I think, and people would say, well, Antonio, go back to the books, learn the difference between weather and climate. And I always thought that was a very interesting response, because it seems to me what the scientists are chasing is the climate signal. They're chasing the signal of climate change. But this is to fundamentally misunderstand what climate change is. The world has already warmed 1 degree. The entire context of weather everywhere has already changed.
Yeah.
Now, change is if you think about a zero scale, so 0 being perfect balance, and then +1, -1, we're just +1. So this new phase, 1 degree Celsius warmer world, is very similar in a lot of ways to the last. But to say that you're detecting a climate signal, the climate itself has already changed. And we can see that. These perturbations of change is really because so much change has occurred in such a small amount of time. The world has to essentially catch up to the world being 1 degree warmer. And that's what so I think what we're seeing is, or at least the way I would, tackle this and try to understand this, is and this is partly the problem that scientists are talking about global warming, but the real issue is stability. Yeah. So we should be talking about a stability signal. I guess that's just really a minute of semantics, but
if we think about, and the reason some of those professors had that view is because back 20, 30 years ago even, it was very difficult to be able to discern the signal of changes in weather from the change in climate. Think of it this way. So you have your earlier baseline right here, say the 1970s, 80s, and you have climate change relative to that. You're looking backwards, you see very little shift if you look at, say, the 1990s versus the 1980s in terms of your distribution of temperatures, moisture, things like that across the planet, evaporation, everything that goes into changing climate. But as you shift into the 2000s, you get more separation between these two bell curves, if you will, these two distributions. You go into the 2010s, there's been more dramatic shift, and suddenly you can see there's some overlap between the two distributions, but this is your new weather, not just your new climate, but the distribution of weather has changed. So you're getting more extremes that were so exceedingly rare. They could occur in the old climate, but they were just so incredibly rare. Now they're more commonplace. These like the drought, the ongoing drought that was in Australia. It was the driest on record in Australia in 2019. That broke a record set in the early 20th century, I think in the first decade of the 20th century, actually. So it took that much deviation to finally cause an event or a pattern of dryness that exceeded something that the early 20th century climate could muster, which was extreme for that climate regime. Now, climate change has allowed something more extreme, and in about 20 years, 10 or 20 years, this this past year will be commonplace in Australia. It will be that dry, every couple of years instead of every, taking 120 years to get that dry. Things like that, because you're getting this shift in separation from the old baseline more and more and more. And so eventually your weather events become more dramatically altered, and you're seeing more events that would be way, way, way off in the old regime that now are commonplace in the new one. And so it's climate is an accumulation in average of weather events over a period of time. And so if you're shifting your climate to a more extreme state relative to the past, and that's why we spend all this time really trying to hit which baseline we're talking about. Are we talking about the mid-1980s, or are we talking about the mid-1880s? Because it's important to know how far we're shifting away from the past. And the farther you get away from the past, the more alien the weather becomes. I mean, we're having a big cold spell here in Nebraska right now. We're getting really cold temperatures, but it used to be in the 70s, the 60s. It'd be a lot more common to get below zero temperatures here in Lincoln, Nebraska, than it is now. Now it's a lot harder to get below zero temperatures in this part of Nebraska than it was in the 1970s, because the climate has warmed fairly dramatically since the 1970s. Most of that 1 degree of warming has been just in the past 30 or 40 years. And so when you shift the climate that fast, then you're shifting your actual individual weather events as well.
Well, I think I get the baseline approach, because you want to talk about climate change in terms of change, and obviously if you're going to talk about it in terms of change, then you are going to have some type of baseline. So that's understandable, but there's a different dimension to think about it, and I think it's become, at least for the academics, too statistical in its reasoning. But there are a lot of withdrawals to that type of empirical approach, and one of them is, one of the things the point that I was mentioning about the extremes is that we're not just talking about extremes in terms of bushfires or hurricanes or even droughts, but just monthly temperature fluctuation. What's happening here in Winston-Salem, or in North Carolina, I should say, is that we've been experiencing temperatures that are almost 20 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than usual. But this oscillation is quite extreme. But this week we'll be experiencing temperatures, so it was in the 70s, or close to the 70s all this week. But this coming week, it's going to be in the 20s, the 30s.
Again, the stability issue you're talking about.
So what happens is we oscillate wildly across the average, which means that the average is actually not telling us how extreme things actually are. Because in the real world, ecosystems depend on a stability, not a stability of the average per se, but a stability of the actual data points. And the actual data point, the actual events, are the residual from the average is actually increasing, but it's increasing. I mean, it's increasing moderately up, so it's trending upward, obviously, because there's a warm change. But we're having extremely warm days, extremely cold days, and this is happening in part, and we can explain it. The destabilization of the polar vortex. So the polar vortex is now spinning wildly across the northern hemisphere. Well, that cold air is going to be a drastic change from the warm air that's coming from the Gulf Stream that's extra warm because of the warming of the mid-Atlantic from climate change. And so we get these crazy extremes, but that's not all going to be characterized by talking about climate change in terms of averages, which has been the predominant way that academia has talked about climate change, as you say, for good reason, because we're detecting a signal. We want to say, this is how many warmer days there are in July in Vermont in 2010 as opposed to the 1975 period.
And you bring up a good point, because I have a similar example here in Nebraska, and Nebraska is known to get those kind of more of those wild fluctuations being in the middle of the continent, but we had 2017, we had, I believe it was the second coldest April on record for Lincoln, and then the third warmest May. So we went from temperatures that were, well below normal, 30, 20, 30, 40 degrees below normal in some cases in April, to having a couple days above 100 in May, which is very rare for Lincoln to get that hot. So I think a lot of climate scientists are kind of playing catch up with this idea of not only the shift in the averaging, but the instability that climate change is creating. In other words, the atmosphere in oceans too are changing so rapidly that circulations that depend on the stability of temperature of the atmosphere in the oceans, they're being disrupted. So you're talking about ocean circulations where you're getting weakening of ocean circulations. So you get areas that just don't get proper heat transport out of a certain area, so it just gets hot. You get an ocean heat wave, or to parts of particularly North America and central Siberia, they get these huge blasts of cold air while huge surges of hot air go into the Arctic, which is what's happening this week. In fact, you're getting a blast of hot air, hot for the Arctic, going into the Arctic right now, all the way to the North Pole, getting temperatures in the teens and 20s Fahrenheit, where we're getting blasted with all the cold air from the Arctic, and it's being modified, it's being warmed as it moves south, and so you're losing the cold air in the northern hemisphere, and that refrigerator sort of is dying, it's weakening, and the jet stream continues to weaken as a result. So it's these circulations, I think, that some scientists are finally starting to sort of play catch up with and realize, that it's not just in the models still that we use still don't really account for these circulation changes. It's more about the average warming, will be this much in 10 years or 30 or 50 years or whatever. But there are some areas that are not warming as fast because of all this cold air being poured out of the Arctic. And there's some areas that are warming dramatically. And other areas are getting huge storms because of these temperature contrasts, or, as you say, just the wild fluctuations between hot and cold in certain areas.
Can I ask a question? In the article that you had sent, and you maybe you covered this while I was fiddling around, fingerprints of global warming detected in daily weather observations. Well, I want to just read and ask you a question about this. So basically, as I understand this paradigm shift, in plain English, it's like, this means that despite global warming, there may be a record low somewhere in the United States, but if it is simultaneously warmer than average in other regions, however, the deviation is almost completely eliminated. Uncovering the climate change signal in daily weather conditions calls for a global perspective. So that means, let's say, even if it's ridiculously cold, it's going to be ridiculously hot somewhere else and balance it out.
Yeah, it balances out, but when you have this warming regime globally, you're always getting far more places that are hotter to hitting record highs than places that are cold or hitting record lows. So there's been a few places that I know that have, in Canada this week, that had record low temperatures. And I mean, in Canada, you're talking 30, 40 below for record lows. But yet parts of the United States, including I'm sure where Antonio lives, they had record high minimum temperatures. So you had morning lows that were in the 60s, 50s and 60s in January. And far more of those than the cold ones. So the balance right now is imbalance. It's constantly the system is constantly favoring heat over cold, and so that's what happens.
Well, it's been crazy here. I mean, we went from 62 just a couple days ago and snow like crazy last night. And it was 11 degrees. I don't know what it is now. And I know, Antonio, you were feeling pretty low over the weather extremes also recently. Yeah, it's 16 here. No, it's 11 right now here, but you were feeling pretty low about it. I mean, it's been, in your state. You want to talk a little about that?
Yeah. So I'll say really quickly is that this is why I've always had a fear that, people say 1.5 degree, 2 degree. This is why 1.5, 2 degrees so catastrophic, so scary of a target for the to be warm. Because we are already seeing in our weather pattern. And again, each degree Celsius of global average temperature is a magnitude of warming. So 0.5 degree warmer is actually immense. This will be an immensely dangerous period in terms of climate stability. 2 degrees will be horrifically dangerous. And, we were talking about this last time, and just the last thing I'll mention as far as the science, and I'll talk more about what's happening personally. The new SIP, that is the coupled carbon modeled intercomparison project, phase 6. Those are the underlining ensembles for the RCPs and the IPCC, getting us close to 8 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. And our current trajectory is, I think, like 7.2 degrees Celsius. That temperature range would involve such an incredible, because you think about what heat is energy. So we're talking about such a maximum energy flux. I think we would literally be pushing the Earth's planetary system as far as it can go.
Oh, yeah.
So that's interesting. But what does that look like every day for us? Every day, what it looks like in North Carolina is spring has sprung in the coldest month of the year. It's almost biblical outside. The birds are clearly confused. The bees are clearly confused. I am confused.
The beetles are confused. The cluster flies here are confused. They're all confused.
Jesus Christ. Oh, God. I didn't.
He's confused too, Antonio.
Oh, my goodness. Man, it's scary out there. It really, really is terrifying. And we are witnessing, one of the things that I was warning the support group that I'm with and things that I've been telling people is that you'll know the end is near by the increasing number of inconvenient brownouts and blackouts that your city is witnessing.
Yeah, we lost power the other night. Yep.
I've had more power outages in the last year, and it's only been like 4. I've had more power outages in 1 year than I can actually recall happening throughout my life. Maybe I've had 4 major power outages in my whole life. I've had 4 power outages, and they were not. Some of them were for a few hours, some of them for a day or two. One of them was for 4 days. This is Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Yeah.
This is not small, nowhere. Like this is, we're presumably going through an economic boom. So this is not whatever. And I'm hearing, the news is, CNN, of course, MSNBC, Fox News is not covering this. There are small, medium, large-sized cities across the United States dealing increasingly with brownouts, and they are, talking about climate change signal detection. You can detect the climate change signal in terms of cost for maintenance of energy infrastructure. That we are spending more money on maintaining our energy infrastructure because of the stress that climate-related events are having. And you can see that in Palo Alto, California. You can see that in Charlotte, North Carolina. So in terms of in California, what do they have to do? They actually have to turn off power to almost 3% of the Californian population. 2 to 3 million people were without power simply because the electric utility was afraid that having the power on during this storm,
Yeah,
which set fires.
Karen Reese is with us. She had, I think she's with us. She had to go through that. And real quickly, I'll just say hi to Henry Holt. Henry Holt's with us. He's in disaster mode. He's in Australia. Jennifer and I had him on 2 weeks ago. Do you remember that? Did you see Henry talk about how they had to evacuate? I mean, they're in a mess. So didn't mean to interrupt, but Karen lives it because she's in California and that's what they're doing. She lives it right where she is.
I would say, though, in North Carolina, I do feel, we've had thunderstorms. We just recently had thunderstorms. I don't think I've ever heard thunder, and it was not like shy thunder. It was very loud.
In January?
I don't think I've ever heard thunderstorms in January before here.
Wow.
So, I mean, the change that's going on is, I mean, we're literally pushing the atmosphere back millions of years. We'll have pushed the atmosphere back by 3 million years by 2030. So we're literally just skyrocketing. I mean, this is actual time machine. This is like a time machine for the atmosphere. We are skyrocketing into the atmospheric path at blazing, dizzying speed.
But meanwhile, the Heartland Foundation, I watched their latest video on Australia, and they're telling us that there's nothing wrong. And Trish just said, yet the stock market is raging. WTF? But really,
it's hard to have an economy when you don't have electricity and water.
Nope.
I was gonna say you're talking about having your electricity cut. We had to do water conservation during the floods in March because the wells, we lost power to the wells.
Mm-hmm.
The wells for Lincoln are out of town to the north near the floods, and there was erosion from one of the flooded rivers that destroyed the power lines. So the pumps lost power. Some of the pumps lost power, limiting the water that came to the city. So the state capital and second largest city in the state had to conserve water for a week or two. It wasn't some disaster, but it was. It was kind of a wake-up call to just how fragile your water supply is, your electricity is.
Sure, I'm on a well here, and the pump is electric, and I don't have solar yet because I don't have any money to get my solar. And you have to have what?
If everybody can just think about that, Nick is reporting from Nebraska.
Yep.
Sandy's in New York, and I'm in North Carolina. We're spread out across the United States, and everywhere across the continent of the United States, we're finding these extremities happening, stressing our infrastructure. Think about that. We're really not understanding that we are in the midst of the collapse right now.
We're in the midst. All I have to do is look at the freaking trees on my property, and I know we're in the midst. On the streets. I mean, going up my road, the trees are hideous, and they've been getting worse every year. Every year. But, we didn't want to come on and make this a doomer fest, but I'm sorry, 2020 has started off as a doomer fest.
We just lost 1.5 billion animals in Australia, and that was the first day 2020. So I don't want this to be a doomer fest. I didn't want that to happen, but this is happening. This is a slow motion horror movie happening everywhere at once.
Paul has a good one here. Brown and blackouts due to decades of infrastructure underfunding from privatized companies so they can pay dividends. That's a big problem, too, because that's the capitalism model of collapse.
But climate change is when everything comes due, right? So all the things we're BSing about before, all that gets revealed now. So, but climate change, just like the Pentagon said, is a threat multiplier. It compounds the problems that are already pre-existing in society, and that's how we detect the signal now in the destruction of our infrastructure.
Right.
Yeah. All these extreme weather events, where are they going to hurt the most first? It's going to hurt poor people. Any lines based on race, ethnicity, other issues that of disadvantaged peoples, they're going to be revealed fully I mean, you already had sort of a glimpse of that during Hurricane Katrina. I mean, I mean, I've never heard that Katrina may have had anything to do with climate change, but that was an extreme event that reveals all the pre-existing problems in a society, the society of New Orleans, Southeast Louisiana, and in that part of the world. So, I mean, you're going to have water running out in India, perhaps in the next parts of India in the next year or two. I mean, who's going to suffer first? Because the rich are going to make sure they get their water. They're the ones that are going to be, suffering. They're going to be getting it for their lawns, getting it for whatever they want.
Oh, come on. I think lawn watering would have to be outlawed, for God's sake.
Well, Nick, how many millions of Indians are estimated to be out of water this year?
Oh my goodness, I'd have to look that up again. I know it was substantial though, because they were talking about substantial numbers of cities
in India, Pakistan too, isn't it? Yeah. And how about Cape Town, South Africa? What's going on down there?
There are towns in Australia that are being talked about being relocated because of loss of water too. Again,
about that, it was just a few years ago we were hearing that. Headlines. Oh, the first industrial, major city to be without water, and now it's just like every city,
it's like normal now. It's become so like normal in discussion that it's not even breaking news anymore. It's just let's talk about Trump or something. It's just like,
that's another part of the collapse right there.
Yeah.
And I could talk about
politicians. Look at what's happening in Australia. The Prime Minister there, he's crazy. I don't understand how you could possibly go on vacation while your country's burning to the ground, but he figured it out.
Right?
Yeah, that's part of the collapse too.
One of the most interesting dynamics, it was literally like a picture out of, the book of Revelations, but you were seeing that these fires were so immense. The firemen were talking about blazes as high as 40-story buildings. And these fires are so immense, they're creating their own storms, their own weather patterns. And it literally looks like something out of, like I think, the book of Exodus or something. But these massive storms, and then they would just strike the ground with thunder, with lightning, and then explode other fires. And you have this, it's truly ungodly what's and we're like responding to this like with little trucks and helicopters, and this is just that's the amazing part. The last 5 years, according to NASA Goddard, have been from 2015 or 2014 to 2019 has averaged between 1.1 to 1.2 degrees Celsius above the 1880 base. So we're pretty close to 1.5 as it is. And if the last 5 years is an indication of where we're going, we're going to be probably at the next 4 years somewhere right below 1.5 over the next 5 years. We're going to be right below, or at least that average is going to be right below 1.5 degree. I'm worried that we're starting to go into the accelerated phase of climate change. Certainly the 2020s, I don't even know if I can say this anymore, but certainly the 2020s will be the last decade that would resemble anything that we were born into.
Yeah.
And you're young.
The extremes that we're already sort of getting a glimpse of. Like the whole like fire tornado thing.
Jesus.
There are in any sort of wildfire. There's fire whirls, these little mini spouts and stuff of fire. But I'm talking about like actual organized tornado that's formed from a pyrocumulonimbus cloud, a fire-induced thunderstorm.
Right.
Like the first one ever observed was in Australia, I think in 2003.
Yeah.
Now they're typical. Like we had the one in California a couple years ago that caused destruction in a town that was wind-driven damage, not fire damage. You have the one in Australia that killed a firefighter when it picked up the truck, flipped it, threw it on its back side. These kind of like extreme behaviors of fire, you know, it's truly like mind-boggling just to see these kind of phenomena starting to crop up, because you realize you really didn't know what you thought you knew about what climate change actually meant. I mean, you could think about, so seas rise, it gets hotter, it gets drier, you get some bigger rainfalls, but actually like seeing that's what it is. And like you say, it's the climate has, I mean, compared to what we know it will likely do on business as usual, it has barely changed yet.
Yeah, it's
Oh my
very
God.
immense amount of changes occurred, but very little changes occurred.
Yeah.
You know, did you guys see, by the way, and I don't mean to interrupt, but did you see the Yale Climate Connections? I know they had their little controversial thing, but they also had a new video Peter Sinclair did, and I wish I could show it without like screwing everything up, but I don't dare do it. And what they said was that it wasn't so much, I think, climate change as it is climate patterns over Australia. It's never going to be the way it was again. Nothing is the same. The weather patterns and the climate is changing, moving. It's not just drought. These are the new patterns. There won't be the monsoons and the rains. Is that something, Nicholas, you could envision, you can get your arms around? Because it was a video I watched just today. It was a short one.
Yeah, I mean, for any location or region in the world, climate, you have natural climate patterns, like in the Australia and the Indian Ocean. You have the Indian Ocean dipole, which is changes in the ocean circulation that induce changes.
Oh, I was going to ask about that today.
and sea surface temperatures across the Indian Ocean over a course of years, like the El Nino pattern. You know, it's on the scale of just every few years you get these changes. And by the way, that's part of the reason the Indian Ocean had such an active hurricane, or they call them cyclone season.
Right.
Very, very, very active in across, especially the Arabian Sea, very active cyclone season was because of more intense rainfall versus drier conditions in Australia that caused Australia to be so dry and so hot as a result. But in the background is global warming induced climate change, and that affects all of these natural patterns too. So the Indian dipole is getting, like El Nino actually, is getting more extreme warming events that induce more extreme patterns of wetness in one area, dryness in another, which is what you expect climate change to do. But it's doing it by changing fundamentally the way the circulations behave, which is what we're talking about, to cause these more extreme states of drought, more extreme states of wetness and flooding, and cyclones, and so they all work with each other. But climate change is sort of in the background, sort of gaming the system to do more extreme things. You know, we throw the word around extreme, but then you actually see what that means.
Yeah.
It means, biblical fires. It means titanic cyclones, one after another after another. It means all of these things that we're actually witnessing.
And this is all before we get to where sea level rise, and that's when I kind of think about what our response will be to all this. But all of these these are all terrestrial things that we're talking about mostly. We still haven't talked about the impact sea level rise is going to have on our human societies and on coastal ecology. And all of this will start emerging at about the same time. We'll start taking on devastating levels of sea level rise around the 2030s. And so I just think about what is the best way. Let's imagine that Bernie Sanders wins this election. Which, if he doesn't win, I'm going to be honest. If he doesn't become the nominee, I'm tuning out. I'm not.
Don't tune out. We need you. Don't tune
I
out.
I am because
You're out of politics.
this is already
Well,
big, and if it gets any sicker than that, then I'm gonna have to tune out.
I know, I
But
know.
here's what I'll say. Let's say that Bernie Sanders becomes president of the United States. We will literally have
Sorry.
we will have to ask the very real question that from people from Maine to Florida to California, Texas, Alaska, all of our coastal states, we're going to have to ask almost 100 million Americans to abandon that real estate because it's unsalvageable.
Yeah, but as while HGTV people just sit and mind-numbingly watch, buy beachfront property.
Yeah.
And we have, if we listen to NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, we have no more than 20 years before we take on catastrophic impacts. So the race is way on.
Yeah. I mean, I would just add, there's certain, and I might include these links on my Facebook page or on my blog or whatever for people to see, but there's information where you can go, like Climate Central's done studies and stuff, and have interactive maps where you can look up sea level rise locally, because sea level rise globally and locally are very different, because there's certain areas that could see more dramatic sea level rise. So like take Galveston, Texas, for example, where they have a seawall to try to protect them from hurricanes, since the hurricane of, was it 1903 or 4 that killed thousands of people. They're going to have, in the extreme scenario, which unfortunately in their business as usual seems fairly possible. So, if it's not likely, it's certainly possible because of the melting from Antarctica increasing more dramatically. You could see 4 feet of sea level rise relative to 1990s by 2050. So 4 feet. That doesn't sound like a lot. That's dramatic.
Yes.
And that 4 feet means that the risk of a flood of 6 feet approaches 80 daily or yearly, approaches the 80-90% range by that time. So everything from storm surges, everything is 4 feet higher than it would be otherwise. And if you get a particularly intense storm, and we're looking at the potential for more intense hurricanes, then you get a more intense storm surge. And so not only does the sea level rise itself threaten the infrastructure and the ability of people to just live in that area on a day-to-day basis, but then those that try to stay behind, they get washed out, and the entire town gets wiped out in maybe just one unusually strong event, and that town is abandoned. You can start to see a lot of places that become increasingly abandoned because of both not only extreme events, but also just the water sitting there, destroying the infrastructure, destroying sewers, destroying everything for every high tide.
Well, I was going to say to that is, first of all, my number for catastrophic level of sea rise is probably about 2 to 3 feet. But that's certainly, from the projections I've seen on PACE, 5. Did you say 5 feet or 4 feet by 20?
4 feet. That's locally in Galveston, Texas. It could be higher in other areas, lower in other areas. It's different because of the shape of the bathymetry of the land.
The land has skin in, and there's different things that add to a water buildup, for example. Yeah. So the eastern coast of the United States actually is supposed to be one of the places that is most devastated by sea level rise. And so we'll start to see, but the rough estimates, the global average is going to be, according to NOAA, something like 8 to 9 of sea level rise. But in some places that may be anywhere, from 9 to 12 feet of sea level rise, depending on where they are. So that type of, that's why I say it also correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, but for every 1 foot vertical sea level rise you have, the sea goes about 100 feet inland if it's like at sea level. So if it's flat.
I believe so. Yeah.
Talk about, because some people they'll say, some people say, because you said, oh, the sea level rise 4 feet. It's like, oh, well then I'll just step 5 feet back. But no, you actually did that. You would be 390 feet in the ocean if you only step 5 feet back if the ocean rose 4 feet.
Yeah.
Imagine being 300 feet out in the ocean. You are nowhere close to being on your feet.
Yeah, I mean that's the threat for, like you said, much of the East Coast and the Gulf Coast because of the fact that it's swampy land and that land is very flat, and so the water rises, it goes much farther inland, and so it destroys and takes the land, takes the infrastructure, weakens the infrastructure, weakens the land that it sits on. And of course, when you get extreme events such as extreme high tides, king tides, or hurricanes, that water will surge so much farther inland than it did, 20, 30 years earlier.
This is why I am in a full panic. Not really, but really in full panic about the nuclear facilities, because we are out of time now. We have no time to begin decommissioning these coastal nuclear facilities because of the events that you're talking about. It's only going to take a little bit of more sea level rise. I mean, inches of sea level rise would actually be a terrible situation. Just even 6 more inches than what we have today would be terrible. But we're actually talking about feet at a time. Yeah. This is way beyond, and people have to understand, even if we became aware of this, even Bernie Sanders, it takes, if everything goes absolutely perfectly, and it never does for nuclear facilities, it would take 20 years. On average, it takes 40 to 60 years to decommission a nuclear facility. That means if we start now, every single one of those projects would be slam in the middle of sea level rise, absolute worst case catastrophe, unimaginable. That's if we started right now. Because the completion would be 40 years from now. That's either 2060 or out in the 2080s.
Yeah. It's just the governments of the world just have not realistically planned for climate change. In any sort of meaningful way. I mean, even the countries that talk the talk, it just hasn't really been anything. I mean, you talk about supposed leaders such as, UK and Germany, and Germany's dealing with coal, trying to keep their coal buddies happy.
Oh my God.
I don't know what else to say. It's just,
we do have a question. If I don't want to interfere, but it goes back to what Antonio was talking about. Do either one of you know how actually long it does take to safely decommission one of those reactors?
Well, from the research that I've been doing, and I started looking at this very heavily in the summer of 19, of course, coming on the scene very late. And I looked at 3. There's been several nuclear incidences and a lot of military nuclear incidences that we don't talk about. Mm-hmm. But the main instances that I looked at was, of course, the Chernobyl 86 incident in the UK, and then obviously the incident with Fukushima Daiichi. And, first of all, people have to understand that these incidences are still going on. Both governments are spending immense billions of dollars. They're building in Russia or in the Ukraine. They're building a sarcophagus to entomb the entire Chernobyl site. So we're not anywhere close to actually solving this. They're still burning. Fukushima is still melting down. They still haven't been able to build. They have the most advanced robotics. They still have not been able to build robotics enough that are going to be able to remove a lot of the radioactive material. So these things are still going on. But as far as decommissioning, when things are not on fire, when we're not facing crises, I don't know. Maybe there's a few where it took 20 years. But by far and away, most decommissioning takes anywhere between 40 to 60 years to fully do. And it's because decommissioning is a very tough process to go through. There's a licensure process that you have to do, and that licensure process, of course, involves the utilities. It involves, in the United States, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It involves the Department of Energy. It involves the Energy Information Agency. You have to work with, successions of different governors, local municipalities, politicians. You have to make sure that the funds are there for each phase of the decommissioning process. You have to make sure that you finish all of your liquid storage, cooling, and then your dry storage. So there's a lot that actually goes in to decommissioning a nuclear power plant, and that's not something that you can just say, hey, the sea level is rising at dangerous speeds, we got to rush this. You really still have to take your time, because if you don't, things might literally catch on fire, and the type of fire that comes from nuclear facilities is not the type of fire you ever want to deal with.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Well, everybody in the chat's pretty much, Shirhan, I put it up before, but she said, just some of the nukes leaking now are the Dome, Novaya Zemlya, Fukushima, the Russian incident, Chernobyl, the Hanford, Diablo. I mean, leaks, how can you not? And then where I live, they're decommissioning West Valley. West Valley is not far. That's all where it's been a dump for years, and now they're decommissioning it. But how do you get rid of all the shit that's been dumped there? It's a New York State Superfund, I guess, or what? It's miserable. And it's not that far from where I live, so it's everywhere. You can't get away from it. You just can't get away from it.
That's essentially what sea level rise is going to do to all coasts around the world. It's going to turn all coasts, because it's not just nuclear infrastructure that we're worried about, just as Nick was talking about. It's our gas lines, it's our electrical wiring, it's our industrial infrastructure on the coastline that's going to be bombarded and abandoned. And there will be, just like you hear these stories, they'll say, oh, don't walk around in the water after these floods in these cities. The water is toxic. You really don't want to be in that water. It's toxic.
It was toxic in Houston after the hurricane. It was toxic everywhere. It's toxic in every country where there's floods now.
So people have to understand, and in a situation where there's no humans to respond, you're just going to have these huge toxic chemical leaks. You're going to have these huge toxic, and a lot of these things, it's not just going to be explosions and fires and stuff that you see. I mean, they were from Amy Goodman was reporting on this Democracy Now! When they were responding to a lot of these industrial incidences. First responders, everything would be fine, and then they're choking, bloodshot eyes, heart failure, skin burning, and it's just like you're being attacked by some invisible enemy. So this is where the rubber meets the road, and I do think that our viewers deserve to hear this, because some of you are older, a lot of you are older than me. I'm 26, but your children will fight these fires.
Yeah.
I will be fighting these fires. Maybe not literally the fires, but this is.
I know.
Into
the proverbial fires you guys got. Look, we've all talked about this before. I have the guilt inherent. It's going to take me to my grave, or whatever happens to me, for what we've left behind for you and my daughter. I mean, and it's hurtful for us that are here, that are in this genre, that are awake. I'm sure people that watch Heartland Institute, I know I'm obsessed with them videos, don't give a shit, and they don't think about this, and they think there's, I watched something on television today, and they're talking about, our log cabin. I don't know, I watch this stuff. Our log cabin is going to be rebuilt, and it's going to be perfect for generations to come on the water. I mean, come on. I just can't take the idiocy, and I watch it because I guess it's a sociological experiment when I watch these shows. Because it brings me a bigger worldview to say, wow, nothing's changing. Status quo, business as usual. The advertising is an onslaught. I wish that, television was outlawed. But I could never do that. That's freedom of speech. I don't know. Oh, Hey Jude says, don't do guilt, Sandy. We were born into captivity. I understand. And I'm not whining about it. It's just hard not to when I've reaped the rewards of all that industrial civilization until now. Now I'm losing everything. Gonna be.
No,
I'm
doing great. I just bought a phone today and this jacket. I like it.
Well, I'm selling everything I own to other people that want to consume. Seriously, I'm not kidding. But that's a whole other discussion. That's a political discussion about how screwed up we are in our country as far as insurance and corporate. But anyway, so Nick, where you at?
Oh, did I disappear?
No, you're here. I'm just wondering what you're thinking of this whole conversation.
Oh, I mean, I don't know if there's really anything else to say. I mean, the only way you can stop climate change is to take the carbon out of the atmosphere, and that requires energy and probably burning lots of carbon to do it. So it's pretty much impossible.
Yeah, right.
Practically. I mean,
yeah.
The Earth has the best means to remove all of what we've done, but it will take thousands of years. So, I mean, hopefully humanity can wait out thousands of years.
Well, yeah. Well, I think that
we'll see, I guess.
Who's with us, Book Hermit? He
have
thinks
a better chance fighting our nuclear fires than we do to wait out climate change.
Right.
Yeah.
Pascal said, does anyone think about Corpus Christi, sea level petro plants miles long, and they want the government to build a seawall? Thank you, Pascal. No.
It's funny. It's almost humorous because, first of all, people have to understand these industrial plants, we call them buildings. These are machines the size of buildings, okay? That's what these are. And machines the size of buildings do not do good when storms park over them and drop. That's so funny. What is a seawall going to do when a storm drops 5 feet of rain on you? No seawall. That doesn't even make any. That's so. We're talking, and that's what I'm saying. There's such a realization here that we're talking about such extreme changes in the way that we interface with the planet. And I think that's really the best way to sum this up. We're talking about extreme changes in the way humans interface with the planet. Building seawalls is an obsolete idea. Okay, we really have to think about those coastlines, first of all, do not belong to humanity. Okay, what we have to do is begin managed retreats. Okay, it's a fool's errand. It's a form of denial to build seawalls.
Right.
Yeah.
It is, because it's just, again, the seawalls are just saying, okay, see, we can do this, we can fix this when we can't. That's like putting a Band-Aid on an amputation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's really what climate change is going to look like. If there's any sort of organized government response at all, which there won't be. I'm completely I've lost faith in that happening. But if there was, it would be a managed retreat. I mean, you talk about managed retreat from the coastlines.
Yeah.
Managed retreat from the tropics, because the tropics are going to become too hot.
Oh my God.
Which would mean mid-latitude nations being kind to people from the tropics that are migrating to their countries. I mean, based on everything we've seen right now, not only in the United States but in Europe, does anybody have any faith that people from Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, or Central and South America, or Central America, are going to be treated with any sort of respect whatsoever to come to, say, the United States, to come to Italy, Spain, which themselves will be dealing with the climate crisis in their own ways,
But I hope there's.
I hope for it.
No, I hope for some humanity. Yeah, just some humanity. And that's not going to happen if Donald Trump stays in, of course. But, I mean, there can be I always say, we may not be able to change things. We can't change the trajectory. The damage is done. But wouldn't it be nice to go down the ship with some class? And that's what I'm saying about, class in our political leaders, with people that will at least inspire us to, smile as we're going extinct. No, I mean, really, like a Bernie Sanders is not going to make the coming crisis worse. They're going to try to find diplomatic ways to manage whatever might be manageable. But it will never happen under the Trump administration, because that's where I could see, genocide of whole peoples. And people are going to die out of natural selection anyway. It's going to happen. I'm going to die, for God's sakes. I mean, I'm in a statistic that if something happened, I'm done. I'm old, I'm done. But that's not the point. The point is really it's going to be natural selection. People, the survival of the fittest in this whole thing.
Or the survival of those who come together. I really do believe people
those who come together.
The people who come together and still bond together. And I do think that you can have large mobilization projects. If the society really... If we wake up from this moment of disbelief, this is the most important thing you can do. If you can wake up from this moment of disbelief in what's happening and accept that this is happening, and you can do that with a community of people, that's the beginning of that mobilization project. Those type of people are not only going to be more prepared, they're proactive in tackling these challenges. And we honestly don't know what then happens, because when you think about model ensembles, there are different variables that occur in how things play out that can totally change the result of a model. And so activating millions of people to begin collectively responding to this, I'm not saying there's going to be significant impacts now no matter what we do. But like you say, we can manage those impacts, we can mitigate them, and we may be able to salvage something that has dignity and that's worth fighting for.
That's what the climate mobilization is about. And they should be in every town. There should be representing, climate mobilization is a good idea because it's locally oriented to do just that.
People need to get this out of their minds. It's not about you anymore. It's not about if you survive, if you do okay, if you retire, or if you get your PhD. It really is now about making sure that we leave something worth leaving for those who come behind us. And if we start really, really engaging with this belief and we are here to serve something greater than ourselves, then I think that partly it doesn't seem so scary, because we all knew we were going to die anyways. It wasn't we were going to live if there were no climate change.
Right.
But now we might have something to live for.
An ecocide. I mean, as Book Hermit always points out, he's not the climate change person who follows, but he talks about, the war is going to get us before climate change is, wars or the ecocide, the killing of the planet. I mean, he has his one view, which is fine. It's all it's a conglomeration of all of it. I mean, we're screwed from every which way you can imagine. And boy, I really didn't want to be like this, but you know what? 2020 sucks so far. I'm sorry. I got sick, and I realized just how, shitty wasn't supposed to be this way at this age for me. But I mean, that's just me. I'm talking about how many days, how much stress can we take? Like you said, Antonio, unplugging, maybe. And now I'm realizing, I feel the same way. I do it. It's how much can you take? I can take the political stuff in dribs and drabs. I can't listen to it every single day. It's just too much. I go on Twitter and I go, oh my God, I get my little fill of the insanity on social media. So much hate and ugliness and everybody fighting.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to climate stuff, I've been having more periods of sort of disconnection, or at least stepping back and sort of um, uh, taking sort of a greater picture of like, okay, what's actually happening, what's happened so far. What do I know about the future? What don't I know? And
Right.
how can I just, live my life to the fullest without worrying every single day about the supposed end of the world or something, because I know, again, we're all going to die at some point anyways.
I'd like to find your piece.
Oh, what I wrote.
Yeah, your most recent piece. I'm looking for it. Keep going.
Yeah, and sort of a way, reconnecting with family and stuff like that. Sort of ways to just sort of live in the moment and be clear instead of swimming through the cesspool of doom all the time.
I know. I don't swim through it every. I don't swim through it all the time.
One of the things I encourage people to do,
yeah,
and I realize I definitely, everybody wrestles with this emotionally differently.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's just like it's so real that it's kind of like the overarching reality. And to me, I definitely do step out of like the bombardment of information. I'll say that. Because I think that's also unhealthy, and that's also an unnatural thing to be doing with anything, whether it's pornography or whether it's TV. Being bombarded with information on any topic just continuously is unhealthy. But as for dealing with this reality, it also shapes how I interact in my day-to-day life. It's not just like, oh, climate change is like everything's going to explode and kill us,
right?
But also that I have to be more. I am more conscious about the way I want to lead my life, and I think that's a thing that people have to wake up and find in themselves. Climate change is not something that you should retreat from. It should just change how you live your life, and perhaps actually, if it did that, we might not be in this incident in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we're going on quite a bit of time here. I mean, with the screw up in the beginning, I guess we've been on 1 hour and 7 minutes. Does anybody have questions out in the audience? I asked about 5 minutes ago for anybody. Heidi said something. Oops, let me get rid of that one. Have you heard about the transition town movement?
Ooh, I've not.
No, but Heidi, I bet you will fill us in when you can. Okay, we will definitely make sure. There's just so much you can know. Somebody here, Karen.
And I would actually really like to know something about that because
transition town
Boone
movement
is like a perfect place. I like the idea of what that sounds like, so I would like to more. But Boone, where my school is in North Carolina, would be, we're supposedly the sustainability school, and that would just be awesome because we're trying to make our campus sustainable, but really we should be thinking about the entire, built environment that we're in, trying to make it sustainable, not just a standalone university.
Let me read it and stop sniffling. I'm sorry. The transition movement is comprised of vibrant grassroots community initiatives that seek to build community resilience in the face of such challenges as peak oil, climate change, and the economic crisis. Transition initiatives differentiate themselves from other sustainability other sustainability and environmental groups by seeking to mitigate these converging global crises by engaging their communities in homegrown, citizen-led education action and multi-stakeholder planning to increase local self-reliance and resilience. I'm going to put that link right in the comments. Thank you for bringing that up, Heidi. That sounds pretty awesome, I think. Wow. Anybody else while I'm fiddling around with this stuff? Because I'm going to put it in at least the comments in YouTube. Let's see. What is this? Matt says, hi, Matt. The war is something that can be manipulated and changed. Climate change cannot be. That's
The
true.
war,
Wars, any war that might happen can be manipulated and changed, but climate change can't. I guess that's the because what we've done 20 years ago comes home to roost, correct?
oh, we could geoengineer.
Oh boy, that's yeah. Like Nick, I had your piece up, and now I missed it. It was a really good piece. Everybody, I want to talk about Nick for a minute about Patreon. I want I lost it. I had it up, and let me see if I have it up. It was a really good piece. His last piece. I put the link uh, in YouTube, and I will be editing afterwards. But it was really good, and you do talk about geoengineering. So if you want to just give us a little primer on that piece, and then I also want to shout out, please consider going to Nicholas's Patreon and becoming a Patreon because his stuff is great, and I'm fundraising for him. We don't do it for us on this channel, but we do support Nick, and if you can, from the goodness of your heart, thank you. Nick, I'm going to we're going to all do our ending. That was my ending piece. And don't forget Climate Crush TV also. And Nick, why don't you answer? And then Antonio, you can close up.
Sure. My Patreon is, by the way, is patreon.com/meteorologist Nick Humphrey. And I'm also, you can also find me on Facebook. I do a lot of sharing of news stories, some analysis of current events on meteorologist Nick Humphrey Facebook page. But the write-up I had done was just on some thoughts on, we call it some thoughts on the predicament. I basically go over the idea of how I think abrupt climate change will actually evolve. And we talked a lot about that actually in this discussion.
Patreon.
Basically how it's not, some people talk about, oh, well, we might go extinct in 5 years, 10 years or whatever. It's not an event. Event to some end. It's a process. You could call it the process of decline, process of collapse. But it's a process of places and people experiencing terrible things, and then some sense of normalcy, relative to what you just experienced, and then more terrible things in other places, and basically that process of decline over time. And we don't know how long that will be or exactly how it'll evolve, but we know it's happening because it's already happening now. And then I also talk about geoengineering and how it's basically, as you say, like a Band-Aid on an amputation. It doesn't solve any sort of problems. It masks them for a little bit while things progressively get worse. So it's a people seem to like that write-up. So feel free to go check it out.
Okay. Well, D. Ranch said, I planted a cherry tree today and I'm smiling. Good night.
Oh, that's nice.
That's nice. Good. I'm glad. And Groot's here with us too, Tony. Love you guys. Antonio, are you pissed about 2030? Jeez.
Yeah, I'll be 37 in 2030.
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't. When I think about the future, it does give me pause. But I really do hope there's going to be a mass mobilization to just, do all that we can. And I think in some ways it's kind of, that idea to me sounds almost a little fun in a kind of way. I don't know what, and that feels good. That feels good.
Yeah.
That this idea of us all uniting together. And pushing our technology to as far as we can, and really just using ourselves to ease this all. So I'm a little optimistic, I suppose, in that sense.
Well, that's good.
I also agree with Nick that I don't like talking about things in this like absolute form. I think it's actually very hurtful, right? This idea that everything's going to go extinct in 5, 10, 20 years or 30 years. I never even say that. What I say is I think our civilization, that is the way that we run things, the way that we operate things, is going to collapse in the next 20, over a certain period of time. But that has to happen. We'll do that very consciously and transform our society, or climate change will just destroy it. So that has to happen, and that can be a fairly good thing, or it could be an absolutely bad thing. So, and that's largely in our hands. And I think that's my most important message to people, is that even though a lot of the future is set in stone, there's still so much that is still in our hands. And so whatever you feel about this, depression, fear, hate, anger, rage, blissful happiness, you have some ability somewhere to change something.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. We do. And even if it's a little nothing in your own backyard, or if it's in your own town, or just something, and all of you are, and so many of you out there in the audience, you guys are great. And you know what? Roger Goodman has a good closing one. The act of fighting the collapse gives us courage and strength. Let's not despair. That was really nice, Roger. I think we'll end with that. Thank you all for being patient in the beginning. Hopefully next time with this streaming to both channels, I'll have that straightened out. It takes me forever to learn anything, you know that. And guys, thank you, Wade, and I just want to say thank you, and don't forget about the Climate Crush TV channel, because that is the channel for the end times, and you get all your stuff. You can click that channel on, and there's content on all day, and you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to change. It's all done for you. So thank you so much, everyone, and all of you have a wonderful weekend. And we'll do another State of the Planet shortly, because there will be, obviously, a State of the Planet. So it's hard to say Happy New Year, because the word happy is relative. But it's New Year. 2020. 2020, guys. All right. Peace signs. Collective peace signs.